Live from the Talking Joe Studios.
It's Talking Joe.
Talking Joe is on the air.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the world's leading premier GI Joe comic podcast. So today we are talking about the Disavowed era once again. And specifically, we are doing a mini episode looking at the curious story, Silent Prelude. But I will not be doing that alone. I will be joined by my regular co-host, a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, listeners and viewers. Hello, Mark.
Hello. So where to begin, Tim? So this story, it's sort of unusual, isn't it, that it appears only in the Snake-Eyes Declassified collected edition trade paperback, and somewhat ironically, let's see, I've got it here. There was a recent reprint of issue 21, which was called Complete Silence, advertising that it had everything Silent Interlude related, but was missing this vital prologue prelude story.
I believe on Facebook, when the editor of that reprint you just held up mentioned it, I think I commented and I said, "Oh, will this have Silent Prelude, the story that was only included in the Snake-Eyes Declassified collection?" And the editor said no. And to be fair, this is obscure, and if I was the person who was reminding everyone that this existed, it was too late in the process of, page count and pricing. And I don't have my copy of Complete Silence in front of me. It's 4 feet over there in a box. But as I recall, I don't think there are 6 spare pages in it. I think it's got 3 or 4 extra pages with maybe the cover of the reprint with no logo on it, something like that. And from a business model perspective, I do understand how, if you have what is it? The reprint, is it $7.99? I can't remember.
I can have a look.
$6.99.
It was $4.99.
Okay, so the way that signatures of pages go, you can't just add 5 or 6 pages. You'd have to add, I think, 8 or 16, and that's another dollar. And that's not what IDW thought it was doing. So in terms of, once they decided what they were doing, if I was the lucky guy who was the first reminder of this obscure story, it was too late. But there is also, let me grab this off of my shelf. Do I not have it on my shelf? Well, there's also then the okay, I guess I have, where was it? Okay. There's also the 40th anniversary special hardcover, which includes it's sort of the deluxe presentation of the remake of issue 21, Silent Interlude, right? So that was a $7.99 comic that came out a year ago, and then just a few months ago, IDW had a hardcover which included that and some of the bonuses from the Silent Interlude 30th anniversary special, the hardcover which IDW did 10 years ago. Larry Hama's original pencil breakdowns. And this also would have been a place to include this. And the 40th anniversary hardcover didn't say complete. So I don't feel like that was any kind of false advertising. The 40th anniversary hardcover did say it was going to have this non-existent Larry Hama self-referential story, which wasn't in the 40th anniversary special. But anyway, this is a very long way of saying, one, there are only two places to get silent, and that is the Devil's Due Snake-Eyes Declassified softcover, which is, I believe, was released in April of 2006, and the Snake-Eyes Declassified hardcover, which I believe was released in January of 2007, right? So $19 and $30. And who referred to this? We did a recent interview. Was it Blaylock? It wasn't Jerwa or Seeley, but someone said, I think it was Blaylock, casually, oh yeah, we did that once or twice where we included some new exclusive.
Crank. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right. It was more recent than our Blaylock interview. Oh, that's right. He said, I'm paraphrasing. We included some exclusive pages a few times in some collections. And when the Snake-Eyes Declassified collection appeared, I had mixed feelings because, one, I didn't read that miniseries and I wasn't interested in it. So I wasn't organically going to buy that softcover. But now there was a reason to maybe buy that softcover because I was starved for Larry Hama GI Joe material. And the 2 times Hama showed up in the Devil's Due universe, 3 times, excuse me. There's Frontline 1 through 4. There's the Storm Shadow series, and I just had it a second.
Declassified.
Thank you. GI Joe Declassified, the 3-issue miniseries that comes before issue 1 of the Marvel run. That wasn't enough for me. And of those 3, I like 1.5 of them. And so, and not only was Larry Hama going to be creating a 6-page new story in the GI Joe continuity, he was going to be breaking it down as well, doing loose pencils, right? What a treat. And then on top of that, Ron Wagner, right? This is 2006. Ron Wagner hadn't drawn GI Joe since 1991, right? When he did the cover for, what is it? Is it 119? 115? It's the cover where we are behind one of the planes and it's getting shot up and the co-pilot is turning around and saying, uh-oh, it's during the, it must be 115. It's during the Battle of Benjin. I think Ron Wagner had done some commissions in the intervening time, but Ron Wagner hadn't drawn GI Joe in 15 years. And also, Ron Wagner isn't associated with Silent Interlude, the original issue 21. But what a cool thing to have him involved in this Prelude, because he is a definitive GI Joe artist. And it's not like IDW was grabbing one of their, it's not like Devil's Due was grabbing in 2005, 2006, one of their then current, not as exciting to me GI Joe artists to finish over Larry Hama's art, right? It was this story, Silent Prelude, had all of the earmarks of fully what's the word? Not approved. Sort of this is authentic, right? And more, and in a way more authentic than anything else Devil's Due had published, with all due respect to Devil's Due's work and its fans, right? Because here's the guy and that other guy. So that was my initial reaction, but I think I don't know that my local comic book store got a copy, so I don't believe I looked at it when it came out to sort of peruse it to then decide whether or not I would buy it. And I think a friend of mine did get it, and I flipped through it and I thought, okay, this is a treat, but it's also a tease, and it's too much of a tease. And the other 6 full comics in this paperback collection, the actual Snake-Eyes Declassified miniseries, is so much not my cup of tea. Even the new Hama story isn't enough for me. And then also, So I have I think I sort of implied this 3 minutes ago, but I didn't say it outright. I have a small problem with collecting material and including new exclusive material and not making it available sort of cheaply elsewhere. Like, let's pretend Silent Prelude was a full 22 pages. If when the Snake-Eyes Declassified collection came out, if Silent Prelude had been issued as a single comic, 6 months or a year later, right? Then I would feel like I had a shot, and it's quote finger quotes fair. But now it's this it's a trick, it's a ploy to get me to buy this collection. And for someone like you, Mark, who I believe got the miniseries when it originally came out, to buy it a second time, which you might not have done. And I'll go a step further. That feels not just sort of sneaky, that feels cynical on my part. The Devil's Due is saying, we don't trust that this Snake-Eyes Declassified collection will sell enough on its own. So we're going to spike it with this exclusive Larry Hama thing that's so tantalizing. You know, that most famous GI Joe story, we're going back to the well. It's not even like some random story where, like Tunnel Rat and Sci-Fi are like sitting up in a tree, like with their like scopes on someone, like a bat across the field. I would really like to read that Larry Hama.
You've just written an entirely new story, Tim. But yeah, it's like, I think, I feel like the publisher should be really rewarding and looking after the regular readers who are buying the monthly book. And when you've bought the original book, you've bought the issues as they come out, and then there's this extra bit that you can only get by buying the thing that you've already got again, it does seem a little bit unfair. So I'm not really a fan of having such important extra material only available as a trade, because you shouldn't feel like, as a loyal regular reader, that you're missing out on something important by not by buying it monthly and not buying the trade.
And this 6-page story, I keep saying it's 6 pages, but maybe it's 5 or 4. Please correct me. It does as this
no, 5.
5, excuse me, as this sentence introduction says under the credits on screen right now. It does connect to Snake-Eyes Declassified in that it takes place after it, but it doesn't connect to Snake-Eyes Declassified. This was the other problem I had with it at the time, that if it's going to be packed with this story, I feel like Devil's Due should have asked Larry Hama to write a coda. I haven't read issue 6 of Snake-Eyes Declassified, so for all I know, the final scene perfectly tees up right before GI Joe 21. But I have a feeling the end of Declassified 6 is still back in Vietnam, or is before issue 1 and not before issue 21. And so I feel like it's too much of both a time jump and also a sort of a category or a topic jump, that if all of Snake-Eyes Declassified is, roughly 1975, then Hama's new story should be roughly 1975. And then I have 5 different problems with this. And I think my last one, although I reserve the right to come up with different categories, is that if you're going to give Hama space to tell a new GI Joe story, don't make it so small, right? Like, I already called this 5 pages a tease, but I think I was doing that in the context of
you made it 6 pages. You added on 20% of story.
If you're gonna have Hama come back, make it substantial, right? Give me a full issue, a double-sized special, a miniseries. This ends up being sort of I think I'm jumping to the end. This ends up being much ado about nothing because, 2006, I'm starved for Larry Hama GI Joe content, and then I get it, and not even getting into the story itself and the art itself and the color itself. It's just this. Can you remind me, since do you have the soft cover in front of you? Does the new Hama story come at the beginning of the collection or the end?
It is at the beginning of the collection.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that's I don't know that that's sort of good or bad. It's such a small detail. I think front loading it is a little cynical because I thought the selling point of this was that Brandon Jerwa and uh, Santa Lucia and
Yep.
maybe Atkins are telling the story, but um it's like uh there's sort of no analogy, but it's like, oh, I'm buying the Star Wars prequel trilogy with episodes 1, 2, and 3 on a Blu-ray set, right? Let's say this is 2 years ago. I'm like, oh, it's got an exclusive trailer for the Kenobi show on Disney Plus, and like that's the first thing that plays. That sort of feels like, wait, that's anyway.
And this on screen at the moment, I've put the Snake-Eyes Declassified ad as well, the image that's on the Previews World website, and so it's got the front cover of Snake-Eyes with his arm in the rain with the Arashikage tattoo, and then in bold letters featuring an introduction and all new 5-page story by Snake-Eyes creator Larry Hama. So it's very prominent that this was a key selling point for the trade paperback as advertised.
I'm going to save this next. I'm just going to tease this sentence for our next regular episode. But I feel like I have some things to say about how the Snake Eyes Declassified, how Silent Prelude connects to. Okay, without turning this into a review of Snake Eyes Declassified, I think 3 of the 5 complaints I've had so far are very indirectly saying this, which I will get into more in another episode about the 6-issue miniseries. If you're going to have Hama back to do this, he should be writing the whole Snake Eyes Declassified miniseries.
Yeah. Although I wonder to what extent he would want to, because of the story that's been told, here as Snake Eyes Declassified. And again, we're getting into
Snake Eyes. Let's just talk about Silent Prelude.
But yeah, the interesting thing as well is that you don't necessarily always get a huge amount of across the comics. You don't get a huge amount of long editorializing from Larry in terms of articles. Here we've got a 1-page text heavy sort of essentially introduction to the story, the overall story from Larry, and it's interesting. He talks about sort of most of it is the focus of the origins of Snake Eyes, of how he came about, looking at that black plastic toy and sort of trying to figure out what sort of character might sit behind that. But then he goes to talk about the Snake Eyes Declassified story that's been told here, and generally I think he's quite positive and forgiving, really, about the story. That he says essentially that this isn't the way that I would do it, but what they do is pretty good, essentially.
I think I might slightly rephrase that as, this isn't what I would have done, but this is okay by me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is the point you just made. I would like to reiterate it because it's a big deal. We get very little of Hama's own voice in text, in editorial text, in the span of official GI Joe comics. There are many interviews with him online, both text and also on video. He's been to lots of conventions. There's an entire book of his interviews published by is it University of Missouri Press? I forget. It's called Larry Hama Conversations. And And certainly Hama was answering a lot of the letters in Postbox The Pit. It's a little hard to figure out which issues. I think I can identify many of them by his voice. And then in some cases, the editor refers to Larry in the third person, right? Well, Larry wanted to do this, so you know that's the editor. But Larry, these two columns of text that we're looking at right here are both a really impressive sort of bit of diplomacy in the case of Larry and Devil's Due, right? Because it's one thing to slap Hama's name on the ad for this collection. Buy it because it's got a new thing. It's another thing for Larry to play ball and say, you know what? Not only will I do the new thing, I'll write an introduction. And Mark, listeners, viewers, I don't know if you know this, but I'm a big fan of Larry Hama introductions to graphic novels. I really like Hama's introduction to Marvel's original reprinting of the Nam. This is not the volumes 1, 2, 3, which are each about 10 issues from about 2005, 2010. These are the volume 1, 2, 3 from the late 80s, which were not on glossy paper. Volume 1 has an all yellow cover. It's the Michael Golden corner box artwork of the soldier in blue with the flag behind him. And Hama, no, I'm getting this mixed up. No, that introduction is Doug Murray, the writer. Okay. Hama writes an introduction to the earliest printing of Barry Windsor Smith's Weapon X. And it's good. And I don't know if it's included in the more recent, the editions that came later, and then the newest edition, which is the like hardcover gallery edition. I don't know that I've taken that one out of plastic at my store. Are you looking for it, Mark? Do you have it on a shelf above you? Is that in plastic?
It's in plastic. Look, so shiny.
And I'm blanking somewhere else. Hama, not like the interview with him or the introductions with him in some of the really good fan produced books like After Action Reports, or I can't remember if Hama is interviewed in one of Dan Klingensmith's Creating GI Joe / 3.75 Joe books. They're right there behind me. I can't reach them. But this is a great introduction because it has information we didn't know, very specifically about Hama in the early 80s doing sort of toy identity genesis, and then also referring to this story. And he is complimentary, right? Devil's Due gets it right. The characters stand up and walk around. Snake-Eyes talks, and now he has something to say, and what he has to say doesn't draw our sense of the rightness of the character. That's a lovely thing to say. Now, I disagree with that, but we can get into that in our other episode where we'll review the actual Snake-Eyes Declassified miniseries. So shall we look at the actual 5-page, or do you want to talk about this text some more?
Yeah, no, let's get into it. So curiously, they talk about this being like the story being the first introduction, or the first interaction between Snake-Eyes and Storm Shadow after their big falling out. Storm Shadow was assassinated. The Hard Master, or so Snake-Eyes thinks. And
when you say they talk about, you mean there's a sentence under the credits 2 pages earlier.
Right. Yes.
An editorial sentence, not written by Larry Hama.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so in canon, this is the first real, Commando Snake-Eyes and white sort of masked
ninja outfit,
ninja outfit, Cobra Storm Shadow. So yes, important first there. Shall we let's have a flick through the pages and sort of discuss them maybe as we go.
All right.
So this first one,
you go.
It's a C-130 transport plane. There's someone
flying at night.
Flying at night
over some mountains. We see 2 hands holding.
The the rear of the plane opens and a lone parachutist jumps from it, which is Scarlett, immediately putting us in mind of issue 21, where
but Storm Shadow was but Snake-Eyes and Scarlett are standing together when she jumps out. Okay.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily sort of fed to us why Scarlett is jumping on her own here. Possibly she's doing some solo mission, or it's a test jump or something. Curiously enough, she already has on her cheek the plaster, which we know from issue 21. That
Americans will know this as a bandage or a band-aid.
Band-aid, yeah.
Not
plaster.
Torch, flashlight.
Okay, so this band-aid on her cheek, which reading 21, you would think, she's somehow injured herself in the scuffle, which has meant that she's been captured by Storm Shadow. So here in this little bit of storytelling, somehow she's already got it. Tim, your baton.
I'm nodding my head. So you can go to, if we're just quickly going through the art, you can go to page 2 and we'll talk about what it means. 5 panels. Her chute opens. She realizes as the C-130 is flying away in the distance, the Cobra CLAW is zooming toward her with Storm Shadow already sword drawn. She throws 2 throwing stars at him. He slashes them in half with his sword, but also him slashing means he has slashed her the what do you call them, the ropes, the strands,
the straps,
the straps, thank you, that connect her. So in the final panel, she is falling and her parachute straps torn or flapping above her, and with his sword, Storm Shadow is heading toward her, flying still in the claw.
So page 3, there's a little bit of a tussle as Storm Shadow is grabbing Scarlett. Snake-Eyes from the distance can see what is happening and jumps from the back of the C-130 at Storm Shadow in the claw, but apparently jumping without a parachute. So quite a dangerous maneuver. He lands on the back of the claw, and this Storm Shadow versus Snake-Eyes tussle ensues.
And specifically, Storm Shadow is trying to slash at Snake-Eyes with the sword, while Storm Shadow is holding Scarlett, having caught her, and she jabs him in the neck, Storm Shadow, with her 4 fingers, making a hard flap. She's flattened her hand and she's jabbing him with the tips of her 4 fingers. Okay, next page. 5 panels. In the top one, Snake-Eyes slaps away the sword. The parachute is sort of flying away. Scarlett is kneeing Storm Shadow to the stomach. Snake-Eyes is grabbing at Storm Shadow's head while Storm Shadow is punching at Scarlett. And then we cut down to the ground, and a cargo truck, a small pickup truck with a canvas covered flatbed behind it, is driving on the ground, and in it are the clown and I'm blanking on his name.
White Clown and Orlowski the Dwarf are the people in that covered truck.
In the distance, silhouetted against the black night sky, is the claw zooming sort of low towards this truck. What's the, not the clown? What's the other guy's name?
Orlowski.
Orlowski is his head is up, and there are 6 effect lines coming out of his head, meaning he's complaining or yelling.
And the clown is sort of looking a little bit sullen, leaning on his hand, isn't he?
And then help us out. What's on the door of this truck?
It says Crook. Does it explain any other panels? No,
I think my guess is
logo for the uh,
The circus?
circus, presumably.
Okay.
So I'm imagining that there's the circus tents maybe in the back of this truck.
All right, so we're not supposed to understand precisely what these two words on the door say. I think in the same way that that I think it's supposed to look like, Polish or Russian Cyrillic. In the same way that help me out. Is it issue? Is it issue? What's the issue that Tony Salmons draws? Where the first page is the Joes trying to cross the border, and there's a sign at the border crossing that's in another language, and you can tell that Hama is sort of making it up to mean border crossing. But
Funny enough, I just looked up. I just did a Google for Krk, Cyrk, and Wikipedia says that Krk are contemporary Polish circus posters. They emerged in 1962 as a genre of the Polish school of posters.
Okay.
So yeah, it does have some meaning to it.
Okay, so my apologies if I've offended some of our European viewers, listeners, readers. Hama, I don't think is making up a word. I think he's using a real word. Okay, and then again, not getting into what it all means, just what's happening. Can you go to the next page, Mark, and you take the baton?
So here we've got some sort of, I guess you'd call them sort of like diagonal panels. So the sort of the page is cut up in quite a sort of dynamic, kinetic way. So the first panel has Storm Shadow carrying Scarlett on the claw, sort of flying through the side of this covered truck, through one side, outside the other, tearing through the fabric covering. The next one has Storm Shadow again on the claw, but sort of the claw somewhat tangled up by some of this fabric that's been torn, and holding on to Scarlett by her belt. Third panel, we have Wild Bill, which this is probably
I just checked.
Canonically the first appearance of Wild Bill.
First appeared in issue 11.
Oh, of course. Yeah, true.
But
I'm thinking he appeared later. Yeah.
But I was about to guess, as you did, the other way.
Yeah, that's right. He the pipeline ploy, wasn't it? Was that his first appearance, or
must be.
So he's looking out of his windscreen down at the truck, and the final panel has Snake-Eyes stood on the roof of the truck, waving up to Wild Bill to flag him down. I don't know quite how you flag down a C-130 transport, but yeah, and presumably the story picks up with Snake-Eyes back on that transport, hightailing it after Storm Shadow and Scarlett to the Silent Castle, where he parachutes himself. The rescue.
Okay, so much to talk about with this, and I think it's a great idea to have this as a mini episode, but I might be talking for an hour and a half about these 5 pages. Okay, so to sort of reiterate, now that we've actually looked through it, to reiterate something that we were saying before, this so much connects to issue 21 and doesn't connect to Snake-Eyes Declassified. This really wants to be in a collection. Another tiny out of date complaint, right? At the beginning, we were rattling off the 2 places where this story could have been, should have been collected recently by IDW. The Complete Silence, which had 26, and also GI Joe Origins 19. That's the word, or 20. That's
right. Yep.
That's the wordless story, written and broken down by Hama and drawn by Joe Benitez. And that comic did not include Silent Prelude, and then the 40th anniversary hardcover did not. Going back a few years, IDW's GI Joe: The Complete Collection hardcover 2, which very specifically that series of hardcovers very specifically included GI Joe and Special Missions in publishing order. So it wasn't going to separate Special Missions out into a separate series of books. So by the time you get to the hardcover that has issue 50, you then read, I guess Special Missions 1 and then 51 and then Special Missions 2 and then 52, etc.
And also they put in things like the toy packs, all of those extra comics, which were sort of subsequent to the original publishing order, but trying to put them into the chronological order.
Right. So like 33 and a half goes between 33 and 34. And this 5-page story was screaming to be included in that hardcover. And I'm going to just say this sentence a little bit. GI Joe Complete hardcover 2. When did that hardcover come out? 2013. This 5-page story really would want to be right before 21 in that second hardcover. And based on how IDW did include some of those Hasbro produced toy pack-in comics, where Hasbro didn't appear to have the original color print files, like the PDFs or the Photoshop files. IDW scanned printed comics and made.
Okay.
Yeah, if you look at, I think it's 33 and a half or whatever, I forget what some of the other ones are, but if you look at them in those complete collection hardcovers, you can tell that they've lost a generation because the blacks aren't pure black. They look like someone took a photograph of a comic book, which is basically what happened. Okay, so the real winner here for Silent Prelude is the person who loves Larry Hama storytelling as something separate from necessarily GI Joe, because Hama's visual storytelling, the way that he breaks down a page, right, when he's literally breaking down a page, doing the breakdowns, right, when he's storyboarding for TV or video games, when he's laying out a cover, doing a cover sketch, Hama pulls off not just a incredibly fun and exciting story in these 5 pages, but his choreography of fighting is superb. And if you go back to pages 2, 3, 4, all of this maneuvering that Hama is doing, all the contorting of the characters, right? These 3 panels, or is this page 2, 3? This is page 3 that we're looking at.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So these final 2 panels, these final 3 panels, right? Not everyone can do this, and Hama makes it look easy. We sort of expect it from him, but to have this many things happening, where Snake-Eyes is landing, and at the same time Scarlett is starting to make her move, and Storm Shadow has his sword in his mouth, but he's wearing a mask, and that now he's slashing up, and also Snake-Eyes is slightly adjusted sort of from landing, because you'd land on a flying thing and you sort of bounce or wiggle or almost fall off, and also Scarlett is now hitting Storm Shadow, and it's all clear. And then again, even going up to this first panel of this same page, right, where Storm Shadow is reaching his right arm under his left to grab at Scarlett, and his left arm is still holding on, and then Snake-Eyes sees it in this inset panel, right? The same sort of fame and magic and reputation that the original Silent Interlude gets from people who aren't even really GI Joe fans, just people who sort of like comics or like Marvel comics or like good storytelling, right? Like people who don't really care about GI Joe know about Silent Interlude. They maybe haven't read it, but they know about it because everyone keeps talking about it, and everyone IDW keeps reprinting it. But that's great, right? It's like some famous movie or some famous book. You can keep getting new editions of it. So the actual choreography here is great. And the actual drawing, considering that in 2006, Hama hadn't drawn any GI Joe that we had seen in 15 years, right? It's not clear to me when he stops drawing cover sketches, right?
Mm.
In his recollections, it sort of sounds like he did almost all of them for the whole time. And I don't know if that's, I would love to see some corroboration of that, because I think it's very possible that in the final year or 3 years, he wasn't doing it, or he wasn't doing it as much, or he wasn't doing it every month. And part of why we absolutely know he did a bunch of the Mike Zeck ones is that those pencil drawings have surfaced, right? I own one. I actually own 3. And uh and a couple are like on Comic Art Fans, or someone has posted a scan of. And I haven't seen those surface for like the Wildman covers or the Phil Gosier covers.
Yeah.
And okay, so there's no reason to think why Hama would have lost a step in his drawing skills between when he was drawing some comics or sketching out some comics that we are aware of to 2006. But you wonder if someone like a Ron Wagner, it's like, oh, cool, he's doing some new GI Joe. Like, oh, what if he's lost a step? What if he's rusty? Or what if he's rusty at GI Joe? Or what if he's rusty at everything? Because some artists, some musicians, some athletes don't get better as they get older, right? And Ron Wagner gets better as he gets older, right? And Hama's storytelling gets better as he gets older, or at the very least stays at the high level. So just in terms of not connecting this to any other GI Joe story, just seeing some GI Joe characters have at it for 5 pages is a joy and a treat. And I want to hand the baton back to you, Mark, because I've got a but coming.
Yeah, I was just going to linger on this panel of Snake-Eyes sort of reaching down to grab Storm Shadow's face, and sort of his eyebrow sort of arching as his sort of having his pulling on his face. It's just so much expression to it. It looks great. I do love Larry Hama's storytelling. Whenever I see his his breakdowns and someone else finishing it, those are amongst, particularly on GI Joe, those are amongst the very best of the GI Joe issues from the Marvel era. And he's very much of a part, I think, these breakdowns from Larry as well. Baton back to you, Tim.
Okay, so now I'm going back to sort of the low budget or the cynical or the tease of it. Hama doing breakdowns, Ron Wagner doing finished pencils, great. But this wants to be inked. It doesn't look bad for not being inked, but it looks like darkened, finished pencils. And to me, this says Devil's Due doesn't want to spend the money to hire an inker or to have Wagner ink it. And believe me, Wagner could ink this, right? He has that skill, but that's going to cost another, I don't know, $200 or $600. And maybe it was time and schedule, but if this is going to connect to the original, and it is at this time, both with GI Joe Declassified and also with I think all of the issues of World War III and maybe other GI Joe comics at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Devil's Due is starting to reproduce straight from pencils, and I can tell, and it either looks a little bad or a lot bad. If you can get a pure black from darkening pencils on a photocopier and or Photoshop, you should, but then other sort of artifacts might get dark and then you have to clean them up, or you get this sort of broken pencil line, this scratchy line, which can have a lot of character. And I'm not trying to speak ill of Wagner's penciling or his finished penciling here, but you ink this and it gets a little smoother, a little slicker, and just do that. that's just what you should do here.
Yeah, and what's the bet that Larry might have even suggested? You know what? You should probably try and ask Steve Lealoa if he would be able to do it. For those of you looking at this and sort of not sure about whether it's been penciled or inks, I think in that very first panel of that C-130, it's very transparent as to this is darkened pencils, because the effects there of the sort of softness of some of the blacks can only really be accomplished by having pencil rather than inks, because ink is a lot more of a consistent solid black, and this has got various sort of shades that can be sort of made out.
This second panel makes me chuckle. For a long time, I couldn't identify Larry Hama's style because he hadn't drawn a lot of comics, or he hadn't drawn a lot of comics that were in front of me. His work in comics, he has drawn comics. Some of it's invisible, like cover sketches. Some of it is collaborative, like he does breakdowns, and his stuff is definitely showing through. But a lot of his artwork is either spot illustrations in National Lampoon or Playboy, or he's working at continuity, penciling or inking with other people, maybe to this is like the mid 70s, and he's helping get a Conan issue to the printer on time, and they're just all trying to make it look good, or they're just all trying to make it look like Neil Adams. And so Hama's not going to shine through. Years later, I can finally see it in his faces. And now when I look back at 26 and 21, I can definitely see it. And when I see this second panel, I chuckle because I don't quite know what makes a Ron Wagner hand, but this is absolutely a Larry Hama hand. I think Larry Hama's hands are a little longer and a little more slender. And then, of course, in the faces, right? Scarlett's face, Wagner's depiction of Scarlett, if he had penciled this in its entirety, right? It's going to look a little more like, this is not a good analogy, but John Romita, right? Or Joe Kubert, right? And Hama's I don't even have words for it. Just the eyes are different. The shape of the face is different. Okay, so can we talk about color for a minute?
Sure.
All right. I don't love the coloring in this. I understand that this wants to be modern 2006 color. That's going to be a better fit for the book that it's in, with the issues of Snake-Eyes Declassified and comics in 2006. And I'm not saying this has to be a retro 4-color only. I mean 4-color printing, right, which gets you 64 colors like the original issue 21. This can have rendering. It can be some version of modern. But can you go back to that close-up you did of the 3 panels where Snake-Eyes has landed on the claw and he's trying to grab Storm Shadow's mask or face? Also, I wanted to point out when you mentioned that Snake-Eyes grabbing at Storm Shadow's head or face and his eyebrows up, is Snake-Eyes trying to take Storm Shadow's mask off because he thinks he knows who this is, or is he just grabbing because he's grabbing, right? Also, hey, everyone who draws Deadpool, if you want to have someone wearing a mask with their mouth open, this is how you draw it, right? It's like you sort of can't do anything besides this because you sort of don't see it. Okay, anyway, back to G.I. Joe. This third panel represents for me A, over-coloring in modern comics, and B, coloring that doesn't agree with the art. There's something, this is an imprecise term, old school about Hama and Wagner and this combination of them. And that might merit some version of modern coloring, but this ain't it. because just look at Snake Eyes' hand, right? How many highlights are there? Is there actually a highlight on every knuckle? Yes. And also all the muscles on his arms and his shoulder and both sides of his head and the edges of his visor and his other fingertips. And, I appreciate that there's some blue reflected light on the right side of Storm Shadow's head. I think this colorist um, is is in good faith coloring in a modern style. Isn't just sort of making up a million light sources. Well, all right, he's making up too many light sources, right? I know there's a full moon because we know that from issue 21, but it ain't that bright. And this panel, the top half of it is just too busy, right? I can't really focus on what a smooth operator Snake Eyes is, what a mysterious cipher he is, because art in totality, art and color are too busy, right? Even though this is a loud, exciting panel with wind rushing by and maybe the sound of the claw itself and some grunting and yelling. And did I mention the wind rushing by? All of the panels in this comic, but this one sort of symbolically the most. It's too busy. It doesn't need this much rendering. You can have highlights, you can have midtones, you can have shadows, you can have gradients, you can have colored light, like the red light in the back of the C-130, the blue light of the moon. Not this much, not this many changes. It's too busy.
Okay. What else, Tim? Is there anything else that you wanted to bring up about this specifically before?
Yeah. Before we wrap up.
Mhm.
Okay. So I wanted to sort of, so I started with a negative, like, I don't want to have to get this, but I have to get this. And then I went to a positive. The choreography is great. It's so great to see these people back. And now comes a negative. As much as I want to know what happens right before the original silent interlude, it turns out I don't want to know what happens before the original silent interlude. And this is I will echo this sentiment in a larger way when we do a proper episode about the Snake Eyes Declassified miniseries. But you mentioned what's the British word for bandage?
Plaster.
Okay. In the States, plaster is what you put on a wall before you paint it.
Yeah, we do that too.
Yeah, okay. So, okay. If Hama only has 5 pages to tell what happens before. Okay, let me go back a step. Silent Interlude is so exciting and famous. And to Hama's credit, I don't think he's holding it up the way that we are. It's just one of 250 GI Joe stories he's written. And every time he sits down to write one, he's trying to do a great job and do better than the last. And so if we reprint this one in hardcover and we podcast about it, we recreate it in, with toys, if we write essays about it, I think that's all like water off Hama's back, like shoulder shrug. I'm just writing stories. Some of them are good. Okay. So Scarlett has this Band-Aid on her face. If Hama tells me, oh, actually she didn't get that in the scuffle with Storm Shadow just before the first page of 21, that's okay. And I guess here we're sort of continuing with that mystery, but I feel like some of the fun of that mystery has now been taken out of it, because that was neat that she has that bandage and we can imagine. Okay. So Hama's got 5 pages to sell some story. And it turns out that what he's doing is he's telling like the 3 minutes before page 1 of Silent Interlude. And it turns out that is not at all exciting to me. Because now the sort of intensity, the desperation of the coolness of Snake Eyes getting into the Silent Castle that we see in 21 is is diminished because wait, he was there all along? Like, okay, it's so cool that he just jumps after her here in Silent Prelude, but um if there's going to be a story before a Silent Prelude, I want it to be a mission. I want it to be substantial. And I'm not necessarily saying it needs to be a full issue or full miniseries. But in that, Hama has a little beginning, middle, and end, and the choreography is great in these 5 pages. It is a story. But in terms of like, does it serve a narrative function? No, it's not a story. It's just a little bit of connective tissue, right? Like, you know, like at the beginning of the first, I always refer to the first page of 97 of GI Joe 97, where 2 Joes, 3 Joes are pinned behind some cars, getting shot, and it just jumps right into the story. And it does not pick up from the end of issue 96, the Snake-Eyes trilogy. And the story of what happens before 97, how these Joes get there and are under fire, has never been told. And it could be, but does it need to be? You know, like if there's a reprint of like 97 and it's like new 5-page story, and Hama writes like those Joes walking down the street, one of them's like, hey, I see some Cobras, or whoever the bad guy is on the first page of 97, like, oh, they're pulling out guns, we better take cover. And then there's some neat punching and twisting, like, no, let's hide behind this car. And we just set it up so that now on the final page of is the title of 97, is that what goes around comes around, or is that extenuating circumstances?
I do not remember.
Hold on, I will just Google Yo Joe 97 issue Marvel. The title is What Goes Around Comes Around. Okay, if there's a new reprint in 97 and Hama's going to do a 5-page story, it's like, what happens before what goes around comes around? And the Joes just like take cover, like walking down a street and take cover behind some cars. That doesn't ruin or diminish 97, but it doesn't feel like the best use of 5 pages. And so I don't ever want to say we shouldn't ask Hama to do a little bit more GI Joe. I don't ever want to say Devil's Due made a mistake by asking Hama back for a 4th time, or for a 4th time out of 4 times rather than just 3. This is such a, it's not story. It's just setup, you know, like if there was some big hullabaloo, like, it's like, oh, do you want to know what Luke Skywalker is doing before he goes to see Obi-Wan Kenobi when he's chasing the runaway droid at the beginning of episode 4? Like, I know there's a deleted scene where Luke's looking up in binoculars and he sees a space battle. And I know we're like scripting. I know there's a deleted scene where he sees his friend with the mustache at Anchorhead or whatever, and he's like, I want to join the Empire. Like, I understand that exists, and that got cut for a reason, because it slowed down the story, it slowed down the pacing. Shoot, 21 has such amazing pacing, but it's like, oh well, you know, Luke's doing some chores, and you know, Uncle Owen's like, oh, some Jawas are coming, we might buy some droids. Like, that story does not need to be told because it's not a story. So Silent Prelude, you know, reading it for free, borrowing my friend's softcover of Snake-Eyes Declassified, or reading a PDF that's been provided by an excellent podcast host, is great. And it definitely should be included in these reprints. But it doesn't stand on its own, and it doesn't add enough or anything, your mileage may vary, to the thing that it is connecting to. So why?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, Tim. You know, in a nutshell, it's like, I think we're agreeing that it's great to see Hama and Wagner working together and seeing the art chops and the storytelling chops, but really it isn't a story that needs to be told. And one of the things that struck me at the time as well was like, it's fun to see the White Clown, because, you know, obviously we're introduced to him much later in the GI Joe world, and it's bringing him into the sort of the chronology a little bit earlier now, because, you know, he's been out there clowning about looking for his looking for his special lady friend for a little while. So you know, he's out there in the universe, but other than a sort of a little bit of a sly nod, us seeing him in those couple of panels doesn't necessarily change anything or add anything particularly massively, as much as the strip is fun.
Yeah, a comparison when Chuckles shows up on a page in GI Joe Declassified. I think it's issue 1, maybe it's issue 2, but I think Hawk is getting driven to headquarters or someone, a military base, and Chuckles is with him, and I don't think he's in uniform. Is he in uniform? But someone refers to him,
Yeah.
and that's fun, and I think the right kind of. It's not even an Easter egg because they refer to him. It's not like
Yeah,
he's in the
part of
background.
story. Mhm.
And that's an interesting bit of retroactive continuity, right? And Hama refers to this all the time when he's talking about how he writes. And I think it's a little confusing because he's using this term so perfectly, but not explaining it. Even people who know what retconning is, he's like, "Oh, GI Joe was always a retcon," right? So what he in this example, what he would be saying is, okay, Chuckles shows up in 87 with those toys, and he first shows up in, I think, issue 60. But no, he was always around. The same way that, um, yes. And so, sure, the two circus characters have been around. It's not like they became circus performers one day before their first appearance in issue 60 something.
Or Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, they've always had the tattoos on their arm. It's just we've never seen their arms before.
Right. Yes. Yes. So having
and until we showed them, I didn't know that they had tattoos.
Absolutely. Okay, so having the two circus characters show up here is cute, but it's actually distracting because they don't need to be there. And I hesitate to say like Larry Hama shouldn't have done something in a GI Joe story because he really is the guy. But I wish I could blame this on a Devil's Due editorial because I with Frontline 1 through 4, the mission that never was, I can, because he didn't get to write that story the way he wanted to. But with these two circus characters showing up, it feels like Hama is like stepping out in front of the camera and pointing and saying, "Hey, look, it's those guys, those guys." And this bit about what I was saying before about setup, not story. It's great choreography that Hama has of the claw smashing through the truck, and that's how Storm Shadow gets this cloth so that he can wrap up Scarlett,
right.
That's really, in terms of storytelling, raw storytelling, this 5-page story by itself, that's great. And there are many artists who wouldn't pull this off as clearly or couldn't pull it off. And so these 5 pages by themselves, I think that's awesome. But like, hey, everyone, did you want to know the origin of the canvas that Scarlett is wrapped in, that on page 2 or 3 of the original Silent Interlude, Storm Shadow cuts in half? No, you didn't need or want to know the origin of that, right? Like, um, uh, I'm trying to think of like, remember in issue, is it 34 when Billy's going to assassinate Cobra Commander?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the cover is that amazing Zek cover, right? The POV shot of the hand and the pistol. Okay, if any writer, Hama or otherwise, it's like, oh, here's a 5-page story about where that gun was before Baroness and Mindbender, Baroness and Major Blood. I think they have it in a suitcase or something, right? Like, I don't need to see the story where like Major Blood steals that from a gun store. I don't need like some explanation where like in a half issue or some new like backup story, Major Blood's like, this was my uncle's gun, but I killed him because I'm Major Blood and I'm a bad guy. I'm going to give this to someone for something special, right? It's, he meant Billy all along retroactively. Like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. So,
but at the same time, Tim, I didn't put 2 and 2 together to realize that was the tarp that or the material that Scarlett had been wrapped in when she was delivered. So when you actually did point that out, I was like, right, of course.
So here's something funny.
As a layer, it makes more sense, this whole sequence now, because there's a logic behind it. So how was Scarlett covered up? It was because he went through this thing, and that's where he got the.
It's not her parachute, right? That got cut and pushed away by the wind. So as a little bit of physical choreography, this is totally awesome. As a story, as a larger part of the GI Joe story, this is totally stupid. And also narratively, right? It's like, how much can you get done in 5 pages? Well, if it's, I mean, some of the best comics stories I've read are short stories, 7 pages, 8 pages, right? Like a lot of EC stories. I mean, not DC, EC, crime and horror and sci-fi from the 50s, like Frontline Combat, Two-Fisted Tales, Tales from the Crypt. Batman Black and White, the original miniseries from the 90s, right? Those are all 8 pages, and they're all tremendous. And many Batman Black and White stories since then have been good. So like Hama is someone who, if you give him just a few pages, he's more likely than not to pull off something. And a lot of writers cannot, right? Like many modern writers in comics can't write a satisfying 20 pages, right? Much less 8. So now you give Hama only 5. And does this story actually end? Like, what's the final panel? Snake-Eyes is communicating with Wild Bill on the plane. And it's like, well, if we're gonna really zoom in, doesn't this need one more page where Storm Shadow is actually wrapping Scarlett while she's unconscious and they're flying towards the castle? Don't we need a panel where the C-130 drops some hook and Snake-Eyes grabs it or lands and he gets back on board, right? It's like once you start zooming in on these less interesting or narratively unnecessary scenes or beats, it can become infinite, it's like, well, there should be a missing scene in the middle of Silent Interlude, or at the end of, I need to know what happens between 21 and 22. Like, when does Scarlett take the Band-Aid off?
True. It's never explained.
And without getting into any specifics, because I'm going to save this for our Snake-Eyes Declassified review or reviews, in big storytelling culture these days, the last 20 years, some beloved brands and entertainment makers have done a lot of this, have started getting into telling in-between stories that we think we want, and then it turns out that some of us didn't want, and maybe the people who love it don't love it as much and don't realize it's because it's not great and not important. And I'm sorry to say that Silent Prelude is that.
Okay. Just to be comprehensive as well, I'll point out that Silent Prelude is not the only prologue or prelude to issue 21, because over in the UK, Action Force,
excellent,
there was a story which was also a prologue. So we talked about this, I think, briefly with Richard Starkings when we interviewed him. And
when you say we, you mean you?
I mean me.
I'm sorry, listeners.
Me and Paddy.
Okay. For listeners who are confused,
me and not Tim.
A couple times when Mark has done a very UK specific thing, I have not been here for that. Okay, please continue.
So essentially, when issue 21 was reprinted in the UK, it was reprinted out of order because we started the reprints in the pages of Action Force in at around about issue 25 ish. So that sort of Zartan introduction story. And so 21 was obviously before that, but such a good and important story that you wanted to include it in the reprints. So because it was kind of slightly out of chronology, and also because it was such a strange story with the fact that there were no word balloons, Richard Starkings decided to have a book ending of prologue and sort of postscript to the story. So it was drawn by a very young Brian Hitch. So it had this front cover by him, Storm Warning. And let me right thing. So there's this story, Consequences prologue, and which essentially is Scarlett in Trafalgar Square on a rainy day, a storm shadow circling overhead on the claw. There she is without a plaster on her face. And down comes Storm Shadow, kicking her bodyguards out the way into the fountain at Trafalgar Square. There's a tussle that ensues, and ultimately he ends up grabbing it doesn't actually get shown, but I guess it's implied that here he is. He throws a rope around Scarlett, tying her up and the thing that ties her up actually here is a trench coat. And then sort of the story finishes with Snake-Eyes revealing himself that he was there in disguise. Prologue ends, and then the issue 21 proper begins, and then there's a postscript as well, where after Scarlett's flown away, that there's a little segment with Storm Shadow and Destro, where they sort of talk about what's happened and tying it into the UK specific storyline.
Mark, Starkings was the editor, or Starkings was the writer?
He was the editor. I believe this was Mike Collins.
Okay.
Who was the writer.
And issues of GI Joe were broken up across 2 issues of Action Force. Is that right?
It might have been even 3. Yeah, they're broken up into parts. Yeah.
Okay. And did that happen with Silent Interlude, or was it printed in whole?
It would have done. Yeah. So it would have been spread across several issues.
Because there were a couple specials or annuals, which were, I think.
Apart from the special, like the holiday specials and the annuals, they would generally be split up into 3 or so parts, I think.
That Starkings and Collins and Hitch are contorting themselves to better account for Silent Interlude in the UK storyline and continuity. Reminds me of how between sort of 1990, when I started reading X-Men comics, and now, but really sort of 10 years ago, it seemed like every 5 or 10 years, I guess this has also happened with Avengers. Basically, every 5 or 10 years, an editor or a writer at Marvel realizes that there's something in X-Men or Avengers which either doesn't make sense or was never entirely explained, and sort of the original writer is gone, and maybe this is now an opportunity for them or someone else to come up with an explanation, or something was sort of problematic and they want to, with hindsight, explain it away in a different context. And some of that has been good, and some of that is incredibly contorted, where you have like a whole miniseries to explain why like one person was really dead when they were alive, or was really alive when they were dead, or why there were 2 of them and one was good and one was evil or something. And I feel like it's this joke about the Band-Aid, right? It's like, I feel like there have been X-Men, 3 entire issues of X-Men at a time here or there, explaining why actually Okay, so speaking of Larry Hama, Hama wrote a 3-issue arc a year or two ago of X-Men Legends, and this series ran about 10 issues and had some sort of in-between stories. I'm not talking about the Wolverine patch miniseries. And this was a Wolverine and Omega Red story, and it was drawn by Philip Tan, not Billy Tan. I get them mixed up. Oh, sorry, Philip Tan, I think. Anyway, um, these issues of X-Men Legends have been sort of what happened next or what happened between, and some of them are an amazing idea, right? Like if Louise Simonson and Walt Simonson could have done, 1 or 2 more issues of X Factor, what might it have been? And I haven't read this. The series recently started over with a new #1, and Roy Thomas wrote I believe the first issue, and I believe Dave Wachter, who did some Ninja Turtles and is now at Marvel doing Star Wars and Alien.
Alien,
Um,
yeah.
I believe he drew the first issue, which is set between Hulk 181 and 182 and Giant Size X-Men 1. So it's like 1974, right? And this entire story explains why Wolverine's mask changes from his first appearance in Hulk 181 and 182. And I know the last page of 180. And his mask in Giant Size X-Men #1. And that is not a story that needs to be told. We can just chalk it up to sometimes Batman has short horns and sometimes he has long horns. And with Batman, I feel like there's some sort of track, there's some runway where you could in one story say like, oh, well, these horns for this cowl has this technology. It's like, oh, it's got radar, or it's got like food capsules or something. But otherwise, sometimes his cape is long, sometimes it's short. I don't need an accounting of it. I guess, can you remind us, Mark, while we're talking about adjuncts to issue 21, 21B, one of the Packin comics. This is not us reviewing this comic.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read it in a while. This issue was drawn by Jeremy Dale.
That's right. Yep.
And written by Hama. And
Yep.
I don't know if it was broken down by Hama.
I don't think so.
Okay. I don't have it in front of me. If I had it in front of me,
Silence between borders.
Silence between borders, not panels. And as I recall, it's sort of 21 from a different point of view, but it's
basically,
it's not really different story.
No, it's almost an entire retelling of the story, but just very slightly looking at it from a different angle, essentially. So it's not quite the like for like retelling that we saw with the 40th anniversary, but not too far off. It's like just maybe the it's talking about the sort of between borders. Maybe it's the you've got two of the original borders panels there, and this one is the one in the middle and the other side of that one. So it's like just very close enough to the original 21 that it doesn't stand up to too much great comparison, because 21 is so classic.
Right. And then if you are reading G.I. Joe, the complete collection hardcover 2, where it is printed right after 21, I think the comparison is unflattering to the directive. Like I think someone at Hasbro said, oh, Hama, do you want to tell a story around 21? And he said, okay. And then a talented artist, but who was not as strong a storyteller as Hama and was not working from Hama's breakdowns, then drew it. And that comparison is unflattering. Well, I guess what we might suggest to the new publisher of G.I. Joe comics, whoever that might be, is a definitive, complete, right? And I want this Action Force stuff with the covers. I want 21B, even though it's not, the most amazingest. I want Silent Prelude, even if it's scanned from printed comics. I want G.I. Joe Origins is it 19 or 20? The issue drawn by Joe Benitez. I want the story in yearbook 3 that's wordless. I want 85 SFX drawn, penciled by Paul Ryan. Oh, I guess if we're doing all the wordless issues, then 275 was wordless, right? Was 275 wordless and all splash panels?
Yeah.
All right, well, maybe we laid that out, because now you're getting a very, very big book.
You can
Look at me poo-pooing the modern stuff.
You can bung in Scarlett by Paul Pope in there as well if you want.
Was this an additional bonus in the Snake-Eyes Declassified collection?
This was an IDW variant cover
for an issue.
I think it was GI Joe issue 1 by Fred Van Lent.
Okay, so it didn't connect to Hama, or it wasn't a reprint of Silent Interlude or anything.
No.
Okay.
Just a cool drawing by a cool, interesting artist.
Right. Any wrap up thoughts? I guess.
Well, for what I thought was going to be a really quick episode,
I really did talk for 16 minutes.
A lot longer than I thought we would. So, who only knows what's going to happen when we talk about Snake-Eyes Declassified, when we have a whole bunch more pages, certainly more than 5 pages to talk about. And you can find out what we think of Snake-Eyes Declassified when we talk about it next on the Disavowed episodes of Talking Joe, which will come up in the future alongside all sorts of other fun things, interviews, looks at other books, news about the new publisher if we haven't found out about that already by the time this comes out. I think it's possible we might have found out by the time this comes out. It's got to be soon, hasn't it? And more besides. I'll say that if you're new to Talking Joe, you can, of course, find out more on the website, which is talkingjoe.co.uk. Links to everything, including our Patreon site. A big thanks to all of the backers who are getting access to all sorts of extra fun stuff. Tim, where can people find you?
Video essays about television and film at our YouTube page, Atomic Abe Productions. My brick and mortar comic book store in Somerville, Massachusetts is Hub Comics. And I write about G.I. Joe at arealamericanbook.com.
So I think that is us done. But remember that
nobody beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Laters.
I don't think you should even call it a mini episode when you post it.
No, it's not a mini episode anymore, is it? It's just an episode.